Hey, welcome to the OMG Tarot podcast. I'm your host, Lindsay, aka OMG Tarot. I've really got that cadence down by now, don't I? Well, this is episode 17, so I should. Following up last week's exploration of the moon, this week we're taking a look at the sun. Full disclosure, the sun is one of my favorite cards in the deck, and for a long time, the moon really wasn't. And to be perfectly honest with you, I still wouldn't call it a favorite. I'd say I perhaps understand it a lot better now, and I can appreciate where it fits into readings and why it's relevant in a lot of cases. But I meet a lot of people who just love the moon, and I'm kind of like, that's not really me. That's not really my style. And I don't think there's anything wrong with liking or disliking a certain card. We're all individuals. We all have our own unique personality. And for me personally, I've always tended to gravitate more toward cards like the sun and the star and all those more bright color, optimistic cards. Maybe it's because I don't have any planets in Pisces. Maybe I'm just not that self-reflective. I really don't think it's that deep. I think we all just like what we like and gravitate toward what we gravitate toward. But I do think it's interesting to chat with readers and ask them what are some of their favorite cards, because a reader's favorite card, I think, gives a lot of insight into who they are and maybe how they read the cards. And I just think it's really cool and interesting and fascinating. Preferences are just a natural part of life, and so are biases. As a reader, it's crucial that you stay objective whenever you're doing a reading. That's true whether you're reading for yourself or for another person. And the reality is, that's not always easy, especially in the beginning, and don't beat yourself up if it's kind of difficult for you to separate your biases from how you interpret the cards, because we're human, we're biased, that's natural. And I think simply being self-aware about them and knowing how to recognize them when they crop up is an important skill to develop as a reader. So, spend time with yourself, and I think that's a big reason why it's really helpful to not only do a lot of polls for yourself, but also for people who are close to you, because when you're doing a reading for someone else, there's that distance that they can stop you and provide constructive feedback and say things like, I don't know if that's resonating with me, or, not quite, but what if? And you can turn it into a dialogue. Constructive feedback will make you a better reader. So what does this have to do with the sun? Well, because examining your biases is moon stuff. And through doing all the things that the moon card is about, like exploring yourself and going deep psychologically and going outside your comfort zone, you really shine the light on how you operate, and that enables you to operate in a way more authentic way. That's the sun card. And that really illustrates the relationship between the moon and the sun, because think about what they literally do. The moon doesn't make its own light, it just reflects back sunlight. So if we want to apply that over to our tarot cards, the moon's only reflecting back to you things that are real and things that are operational. And by doing that moon stuff and following that light that's being reflected onto it, you're able to engage with it and bring it up to the surface and maybe even feel proud of it, or at least be comfortable with it and be aware of it. Because the sun is everything that's out in the open. It's everything that you're proud of and everything that you're not hiding. And it's all the true, genuine, authentic pieces of yourself that you got in touch with through doing moon stuff. So let's break this card down visually. We've got right at the center a baby who's naked and looking right at the viewer, making eye contact with the viewer. The baby is riding a horse, and that horse does not have a saddle or reins or a bridle on. The baby also is holding a big, tall banner that's flowing and really takes up a lot of the space on this card. That banner is gigantic. It's bigger than the kid, it's bigger than the horse. And behind the baby and the horse is a wall, and there's a row of sunflowers peeking up above the wall. Then, turning your gaze up toward the top of the card, we have the sun, essentially the main character here. You can interpret this card as the inverse of the moon, in the sense of Remember how in the moon we mentioned how it symbolizes all things that are dark, not in the sense of scary or forbidden, but dark in the sense of kind of operating under the surface and hidden from normal view? Well, the sun is everything that's within normal view. It's everything that's on display and under the spotlight. It's the things that we're proudly broadcasting outward. And that's where we can encounter the idea that the sun isn't always a positive card. Because taking a look at it, it's very easy to interpret this as inherently a positive card. I mean, what could go wrong here, right? But in tarot, none of the cards are inherently positive or negative, so let's think about situations where the sun can possibly come up and it might not always be a great thing. It could be that a secret is out in the open, maybe some sensitive information that you didn't want leaked. Well, guess what? It's under the spotlight, it's out in the open, and now you gotta deal with the fallout of that. Or it could sometimes point to feeling very exposed because similarly, you're out in the open and you're under that spotlight, so you might not have been ready to get up on stage and perform, or you might have wanted to lay low, but all eyes are on you. You're being looked at and stared at, and you really have no privacy and have no secrets now. So, see how the cards are very contextual? How the meaning doesn't change. The sun is still being in the spotlight and self expression and not having anything to hide or anything held close to yourself. And whether that's a good thing or a bad thing depends on the situation it's occurring as part of. Sometimes I think about tarot cards kind of like Legos in that way, in that each one has its base meaning, but how you snap them together really illustrates how the story works and how they support each other and how they all fit into something bigger that you're building. So let's take a look at what else we've got going on this card. We've got 4 sunflowers peeking up over the wall behind the baby and the horse, and a lot of readers associate these 4 flowers with the 4 suits. And now at first when I read this, I was kind of like, that's a stretch. But then looking at the numerology of the card, I see some validity for it. So here's what I mean by that. Remember in a few episodes we talked about finding cards that are kind of related to each other through their numbers, like how the lovers and the devil are, the lovers are number 6 and the devil is 15, so when you add the 1 and the 5, you get 6. And that can illustrate some themes that the 2 cards share. Well, let's take a look at the sun. The sun is number 19, so we can add 1 plus 9, and we get 10, which is a reference to the Wheel of Fortune. But then we can also add that 1 and 0 and get 1, which is the Magician. So we have this trio of cards in a little family here, and let's explore their themes a bit further. If you remember back to the Magician, what's he got on his table? Yeah, he's got 4 tools on his table that symbolize the 4 suits of the minor arcana: a pentacle, a sword, a cup, and a wand. So having these 4 flowers in the sun as a callback works for me, especially when you think about the symbolism of these blooming, beautiful sunflowers. You could make the argument that while our magician was just becoming acquainted with these tools and had to see them very literally, he's now made his way through the journey of the major arcana, and by the time we're at number 19, he's kind of made them his own, and he's really flourished in a lot of ways. Because remember, this card is largely about personal self-expression, so you might have begun with a set of very concrete, very specific tools, but now that you've learned how to use them and you've learned how to really push yourself further and achieve your goals through them, they've taken on a more personalized meaning. You've kind of almost gotten them attuned to you. So then how does the Wheel of Fortune fit into this? When it comes to meaning, the Wheel of Fortune is largely about the situations that life throws your way and how you navigate them and move your way through them. We're going to break it down a bit more in the episode dedicated to the Wheel of Fortune, but just for now, know that there's a lot of alchemical symbols drawn into that card, and that's really where a lot of the connection between the Magician and the Wheel of Fortune occurs. As I think I've mentioned before, numerology isn't typically my first go-to when interpreting tarot cards. It's certainly there, it's certainly a thing, but if you've been hanging out with me long enough, you know that I tend to do a lot of focus on the astrological connections. So let's talk about the sun. This card is associated with, you guessed it, the sun. And much like the Magician and the Hanged Man, it's one of those cards that's associated with a planet rather than a specific zodiac sign. So all that really means is that the vibe of this card is more about what that planet is versus, say, if it was associated with a zodiac sign, the traits of that sign. It's subtle, and it's not something that I think you should get yourself too caught up on, because at the end of the day, it's really not going to make a huge difference. But in terms of the sun being associated with the sun, let's talk about what the sun is in astrology. It's the spotlight, and it's the ego, and it's what you put forward. It's also what gives light and warmth to everything else. It's kind of like the center hub of all the spokes around the wheel that make up your natal chart. So no matter what placements you have, your sun sign is influencing them because it's the one that gives the energy and gives the life to everything else. After all, we wouldn't have a solar system without a sun. So think of this as the sun is warmth, the sun is light, the sun is vibrance that makes everything else possible. And I think you can read into that the choice to depict the sun as this baby riding forward, making eye contact with the viewer. It's creative energy, it's freshness and newness, and a readiness to march forward and move into whatever the next cycle is going to be. And I think this is a really important point to keep in mind when you drop this card into context, because at number 19, it follows up after the moon, and it comes right before Judgment. We'll get to that in a moment. First, I want to focus on the pony, because this horse is clearly not a full-sized horse. It's pretty short, and we could make the argument that, well, maybe the wall is just pretty tall, which, alright, but look at its scale compared to the baby. Horses are pretty big, and this horse, in comparison with the baby, is not. So is it just as simple as a little horse for a little kid? I think so. And I think that depicting a small, presumably young horse here is just going along with the theme of refreshed and rejuvenated and not carrying a whole lot of baggage, because we really worked through a lot of that baggage in the moon. And now, while we're on that topic of a lack of baggage, let's make a connection between the sun and the Fool, because there are actually a number of connections here. First, take a look at that feather that's on the child's headdress. It looks quite a bit like the feather in the Fool's cap, doesn't it? Well, you could make the argument that the Fool started the journey and worked his way through all the lessons along it, like the Empress, the Devil, the Star, the Tower, etc., and that now, having processed through all of those and worked through them in the moon, the Fool is now ready to approach the next day and march forward, rejuvenated and refreshed and ready for things, which we've seen this idea of rejuvenation a couple times. We saw it in the Star, but I'd like to think the difference between the Star and the Sun is that the Star was a little more practical. The Star was, I'm coming up after the Tower, and I have to rebuild because quite literally all my building materials got ripped down and brought out to sea. Versus the Sun is more personal and it's more introspective. It's, this is the new me that I'm building. Perhaps the moon work stripped me down to nothing but that inner light, and now the inner light is marching forward on its little pony. Which, hey, also, in both cases, the Fool and the Sun, we have our human figure accompanied by a small white animal. Could the white pony be kind of similar to the little white dog on the Fool? Maybe. In both cases, they are looking pretty triumphant and ready for what comes ahead. So, let's talk about what's ahead for our sun, because as we mentioned earlier, Judgment is what's ahead for the sun. Judgment, number 20 in your major arcana, is the card of reckoning. It's the card of, did you do the work you were supposed to do, and were you successful? Essentially, this is where the Fool hands in his assignment and waits to hear, did I pass? Did I fail? Do I get to move on? Did I hear the call and did I heed the call? Because after Judgment, we only have one more, and it's the world, and then we're right back at zero, back at the Fool again. But I don't want to get too far ahead of myself. Let's talk about the relationship between the Sun and Judgment. The Sun is putting your best foot forward in anticipation of Judgment. It's your last moment of, hi, I'm here, this is what I've done, before it's time for external parties to take a look at what you've done and determine if you've done enough. So, express yourself. Be true to yourself. Don't limit or inhibit yourself, just let your freak flag fly, because if the baby's carrying anything, that is quite a flag, and you could call that the freak flag. So when the Sun comes up in a reading, what does it mean? Well, it means just that. It means you're in a position to really express yourself and really let your freak flag fly and not be encumbered by concerns or fears or baggage. I know I say that word baggage a lot, and it applies here. It means everything is out in the open, whether that's good or bad. It means the spotlight is on you, and so it means don't hide, don't pretend. You really can't hide and can't pretend because you are under the microscope right now. Let's do an example pull featuring the Sun. Let's pull on, will the relationship I'm currently in last? So we shuffle, 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 and we pulled the Four of Wands. Yes, I do think this relationship is going to last, and here's why. Our Four of Wands is on our Rider-Waite-Smith deck. It's the one that looks like the couple is getting married, and they've got that big castle behind them, and they've got the wedding arch right in front of them. So, for a relationship spread, this is pretty awesome. But let's talk about how that Four of Wands and the Sun work together. I'm seeing this as the person appreciates you for all the unique things you bring to the relationship. They appreciate that you kind of give them a platform to be uninhibited and let their freak flag fly, and you're able to really show up and genuinely be yourself in this relationship. So you guys might be two weird peas in a pod, and that's exactly why it's going to work and last a long time. So I like it. You've got a super solid foundation here, as evidenced by that huge castle in the background on our 4. And look how happy the people are. I would say another component of this relationship lasting is that nobody's hiding anything. Everything is out in the open, and you guys are both very able to be true and genuine and open with each other. I like that. So that's the Sun and how it fits into a reading, and more broadly, how it fits into the major arcana. When it comes up, know that it's no secrets, no baggage, and just everything under the spotlight exposed and ready to engage with whoever and whatever it encounters. It can be very freeing in a way, but much like the Fool, it can also lead you into things and situations that you weren't quite prepared for. So just head on in with optimism and see where the journey takes you next. That concludes our discussion on the Sun, so thanks for listening. I hope you learned something. As always, if you want to keep up with me, give me a follow on Instagram at its_OMG_tarot. You can also head over to my website to read my blog and learn more about my practice and what I do and get yourself on the email list. That website is omgtarot.com. All right, have a great one. We'll talk next week. Bye-bye.